Farm, Mercenary, Aviator, Commander, Golem Commando. In 2021, this was the meta, but it would change in the summer of 2022, when Boss Floor and Necromancer Boss Rush gets added. Shortly after the update, Farm, Enforcer, Plasma, DJ, Golem Commando was considered the meta, but nobody was prepared for how truly deep it went. The first improvement came with Railgunner. As people realized Railgunner lagged less than GC, they simply swapped it out. What came next was Zed-Yard, and it would mark the start of the era of Graveyard. Much more improved Huntsman variants of Graveyard would come out. Shortly after came Shoddy Mark's Anarchist, which took advantage of Commander not being in the meta. However, Shoddy Mark's was a direct counter, which brought it also into the meta. This was the first part of the Grave era, a fraction of what was to come. Quickly after Shoddy Mark's Anarchist was brought into the meta, it would bring in the Commander variants of the current metas as well. The Huntsman variants also improved to heavily incorporate lag. Just as things couldn't get more complicated, Clicker meta came into play, which brought multiple non-Huntsman lag variant metas. Multiple more metas would be created during this time period, giving us the second Grave era. Here's a chart to show how each meta interacted with each other. The meta seemed to be getting more and more complicated every single day. However, as one day came, it all converged into a single loadout. Farm, Golem Scout, Plasma, Commander, Railgunner. That was it. The meta to end all metas. The meta to put an end to the 2-year Graveyard era. It was better than everything. It was the best meta. Until...
Now, why might the meta be changing so much, you could ask? Well, the meta is basically dependent on how viable a loadout is late game and how far it can go into. Now, there's basically 3 sections to late game. There's the initial wave 38 to 40 Necro Boss Rush, and then there's Guardians, and there's the Void. Initially, these earlier loadouts couldn't even counter the Necro Boss Rush, as it was deemed impossible due to lag. Your best bet was just microing DJ and trying to stall it out as long as possible. But then, it was slowly transitioned into Graveyard. This is why Graveyard was so effective, because you can continuously micro and stall out your death to these Necromancer bosses. But eventually, there would be so much Fire Spirits on the map that you couldn't out-micro it with Graveyard. This is what led to the death at usually wave 40 or so for the Graveyard loadouts. Now, at the end of the era of Graveyard, brought the revolutionary tech of Commander micros. And this is where loadouts pivoted from using DJ to Commander, because Commander was able to not just stall the Necromancer bosses, but actually further push back. And because of this, it allowed it to be even more successful, and you would actually be able to get until Void. Until Void made it roughly halfway across the map, the Necromancer bosses would be spawning too much, and you would eventually die. However, this was revolutionary. It brought the end of the Graveyard era. That is how this loadout was able to bring an abrupt end to all other meta paths and be the best loadout. There wasn't any loadout that was considered better than these. However, this loadout, Freds, standing for Farm, Railgun, Enforcer, and double support, including Commander and DJ, beats it. And the reason is because it doesn't just use one tech, it uses both. Not only do you Commander micro to push back the Necromancers, but once they get too much for you to handle, once the Void pushes you down the map, now you can DJ micro. And this DJ micro stalls out the Necromancers. Because once you reach the point in where it is no longer possible to further counter the Necromancer boss rush, you could switch gears into stalling the Necromancer boss. Whereas before, we only had the option to stall it, or we only had the option to counter it. But now, we have the option to do both. And this is why it's considered better than any other loadout to come before it.
If you don't believe me, you can watch it for yourself. And for the record, my micro is absolutely horrible. Now, you might also be wondering, I only have Enforcer for early game. Can Enforcer truly counter everything? Can it live through the hardest mid-game rushes? Well, because Enforcer is immune to Anarchist abilities, it actually is extremely viable. The hardest part about early game is going to be Toxics, which you can use a Commander Airstrike for. And if you follow the document correctly, you should be able to full counter any sort of aggressive play that they try and attempt mid-game. And if you don't believe me, you can watch me do it. This is the current best meta and maybe the final meta to ever be created with this current set of balancing changes. I recommend you check out the Discord if you want to learn how to get better at the game, and have a nice day.